Karen's SUV tore through my cornfield at dawn like a drunken rhinoceros, sending stalks flying and slamming straight into my Scarecrow Henry, with a sickening crunch of wood and straw. The impact barely slowed the vehicle as Henry's head popped clean off, landing right on the hood like it was waving good morning. I stood on my porch, coffee still in hand, mouth half open in disbelief as Karen casually reversed over what was left of him, just for good measure, before speeding off as if she hadn't just committed premeditated Scarecrow murder in broad daylight. That was the moment I knew Karen wasn't just an annoying neighbor, she was a storm barreling straight for me. And the funniest part? She actually thought this farm was hers to mess with. Henry had been standing guard over this land long before Karen came rolling into town with her cookie-cutter McMansion and that insufferable HOA attitude. He might have been a little rough around the edges, missing a button eye, straw poking out of his sleeves, but he had character. Every kid in town grew up knowing Henry, every bird knew better than to challenge him, and every fall festival proudly displayed him up front with a fresh coat of paint and a goofy grin. He wasn't just a decoration, he was part of the farm, just like the creaky old barn and the rust-red tractor that still coughed to life on cold mornings. But to Karen, Henry was an eyesore. A word she had thrown around more than once during her brief but insufferable visits to my property line. She had moved in 6 months ago, bought up the old Miller place, and immediately started treating our small town like her personal suburban playground. Rules, regulations, and perfectly manicured hedges, that was Karen's world. Wildflowers, rustic charm, and friendly scarecrows? Not so much. At first, I figured she'd adjust. Small-town life has a way of softening even the stiffest city transplants. But Karen wasn't softening. She was hardening. Her first complaint was about my fence being too rustic, meaning it wasn't whitewashed plastic like hers. The second was about Henry scaring her yappy little excuse for a dog. By the third visit, she wasn't asking anymore, she was demanding. I ignored her like any good farmer would. But Karen wasn't used to being ignored. And that's when the real trouble started. The first time Henry got hit, I thought it was an accident. The roads get muddy when it rains and maybe she had misjudged the turn. I rebuilt him without a second thought, had him standing tall again by sunset. 2 days later, he was down again, this time with tire tracks leading straight from Karen's driveway. The imprint of her SUV's front bumper was stamped right across his chest like a signature. I might have laughed if it wasn't so infuriating. When I ran into Karen at the feed store, I half expected her to deny it. Instead, she just flashed that tight, smug smile of hers and said, "Maybe you should put him somewhere safer." Then she winked. She actually winked. Now, I'm not the kind of guy to start a war over a pile of sticks and old clothes. But I'm also not the kind to let someone stomp all over my land without consequence. Henry had been here longer than me, built by my father when I was just a kid, patched up over the years with new shirts, new straw, and a lifetime of memories. Every stitch, every repair, every worn spot had a story. Henry was family, in the way only people who grow up on a farm could understand. And thanks to Karen, he'd been flattened twice in a single week. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun sink behind the hills, I knew this wasn't going to end with a friendly neighborly chat. Karen had drawn the first line, and from the smug look on her face at the feed store, she was just getting started. The question wasn't if she'd strike again. It was when. Sure enough, by Saturday morning, Henry was gone. Not just knocked over, gone. I came back from town to find nothing but a scattered pile of straw, splintered wood, and a scrap of his old flannel shirt fluttering in the breeze. But that wasn't the worst part. Pinned to the post where Henry used to stand was a note, scrawled in looping, arrogant letters. "Get a real decoration. Karen." I stood there, fists clenched, letting the anger roll through me in slow, burning waves. This wasn't just about Henry anymore. This was about respect. About the fact that Karen thought she could waltz into this town, into my life, and dictate how I ran my own land. And maybe, just maybe, it was about proving that some of us knew how to fight without ever raising our voices. That night, as I gathered up what was left of Henry and carried him into the barn, I made a decision. Karen wanted a fight? She was about to get one. Back in the barn, I dusted off the old workbench, still cluttered with rusted tools and half-finished projects from when my father was alive. As I stared at the pile of broken wood that used to be Henry, it hit me. Karen didn't just smash a scarecrow, she handed me the perfect excuse to remind her that out here, we play by different rules. The thing about farmers? We know how to build. But more importantly, we know how to build things that don't break. Karen was about to learn that the hard way. If she thought the note stunt would scare me off, she thought wrong. It only made her bolder. Wrecking Henry turned into her twisted little hobby. The next time I patched him up, she waited for a stormy night to finish the job. I woke to thunder rolling across the fields and the faint thud of something heavy. By the time I got outside, Henry was face down in the mud, soaked, shredded, and mashed into the dirt. Fresh tire ruts ran straight from Karen's property, and in the distance her SUV's taillights glowed red through the rain like a signature. The next morning, she had the audacity to wave at me from her porch, coffee in hand, leopard print robe flapping like she was proud of herself. She didn't care about hiding it anymore. This wasn't just about Henry, it was about control. About seeing how far she could push before I pushed back. I've dealt with raccoons smarter than Karen. At least raccoons know when to stop before they get caught. Small towns remember things and word was already spreading. Old man Jeff at the hardware store just grinned when he handed me a bag of nails. "Heard you got yourself a scarecrow problem," he said. Sally at the diner leaned in while pouring my coffee and whispered, "You let us know if you need help putting him back up." I appreciated it, but this wasn't a job for kind neighbors. This was personal. That week, Karen made it a point to drive past the farm every evening. The first night she slowed down to smirk at the field. The second she rolled down her window and yelled, "Give it up, farmer boy," before peeling out and showering my driveway in gravel. I stayed quiet, but something clicked. This wasn't about scarecrows anymore. This was about pushing buttons. Well, she'd pushed the last one. The fourth time she hit Henry, it was different. She didn't just flatten him, she parked on top of him like he was a trophy. There she sat, scrolling on her phone behind the wheel of that monster SUV like my field was her driveway. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, and stared her down until she finally reversed and drove off, leaving Henry mangled beneath her tires. That night, I sat on the barn steps, the wind heavy with the scent of wet earth and hay. I thought of my father, of the way he built Henry when I was just a barefoot kid chasing chickens. He always said, "Every problem has a solution. You just have to be patient enough to find it." Well, I've been patient. Too patient. And then my eyes landed on the old padlocked door at the far end of the barn. That's when I remembered what was behind it, Dad's old workshop. He hadn't touched it much in his later years, but when I was young, that's where he taught me how to weld, how to bend metal, how to build things that could weather anything, storms, time, and even bullheaded neighbors. He wasn't one for long speeches, but he always told me, if you don't want it to break, don't build it like it will. The next morning, before the rooster had even crowed, I unlocked that door. The smell of old oil and dust hit me like memory. The welder was still there, tucked under a tarp. Steel pipes, sheet metal, bolts, everything I'd need. This time Henry wouldn't just stand tall. He'd stand unbreakable. By mid-morning I was already sketching out the new design. On the outside he'd look the same, floppy hat, stitched up flannel shirt, straw poking from the sleeves. But inside, steel. Reinforced pipe for a spine, welded crossbars for arms, anchored into a steel base sunk 2 feet into the earth. Let's see Karen knock that over. It didn't matter what Karen drove at him, Henry wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Buried 2 feet deep into the earth, reinforced with steel and stubbornness, he was built to take a hit and then some. And the beauty of it? To anyone driving by, he still looked like the same old Scarecrow, floppy hat, patchy flannel, crooked smile. That afternoon, while I worked under the soft hum of the radio, cutting and welding in the barn, Karen drove by. Probably expecting to see me sulking or stringing together another scarecrow with twine and a prayer. I barely glanced up. Let her think I'd finally thrown in the towel. Let her believe she'd won. Meanwhile, sparks flew, steel rang, and Henry was being reborn, stronger, meaner, and ready. The town was buzzing. I hadn't exactly been subtle about collecting supplies. It's hard to be sneaky when you've got lengths of pipe sticking out of your truck bed like a porcupine. Some folks whispered I was putting up a new fence. Others figured I was caving to Karen's nagging and modernizing the place. Only a few, like Sheriff Tom and Sally at the diner, gave me that look. The one that says they know you're up to something but they're smart enough not to ask. I worked late every night until the frogs started singing and the stars came out. Each weld felt like a quiet promise, not just to me but to my dad. To this land. To every soul who ever had to deal with someone like Karen. Henry wasn't just going to be a scarecrow anymore. He was going to be a monument. When I finished, it was almost poetic. From the road, Henry looked exactly the same. Same saggy jeans, same burlap grin. But inside he was steel and resolve. His feet were bolted into the soil. His arms, welded crossbars strong enough to stop a truck. And that grin? That one was just for me. I set him back in place just before dawn, right where he'd always stood. The wind rustled through the corn. The sun crept over the hills. And there he was, Henry, tall, proud, and unbreakable. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the fog lift, knowing Karen wouldn't be able to resist. She'd come. The question wasn't if, it was when. Turns out, when came sooner than expected. The sun hadn't even burned off the last of the mist when I heard her SUV growling down the gravel road. I didn't move. Just sat there in my rocker, coffee warm, morning still. Her car crawled to a stop right at the edge of the field, close enough to get a good look at Henry. She stared, squinting like she couldn't believe I dared to put him back. Then, no hesitation, she floored it. Her SUV tore into the field like a wrecking ball with wheels. Corn snapped and flew. She aimed straight for Henry, hell-bent and wild-eyed. I just watched. She hit him dead center, bumper to chest, full speed. Only this time Henry didn't budge. The sound of impact cracked across the field like thunder. Her shiny front end crumpled like a soda can, hood folding, radiator hissing, headlights popping like corn on a skillet. Her airbag exploded in her face, snapping her head back like a slap from karma itself. Everything went still. Steam hissed. Crows flapped off into the sky. And Henry stood there. Had a little askew. Unshaken. Karen? Not so much. She sat behind the wheel, dazed, gripping it like it might still drive her out of the mess. I strolled across the field slow, boots crunching in the dirt, coffee still in hand. By the time I reached her, she was wrestling with the deflated airbag like it was to blame. She saw me and shrieked, "What the hell did you do?" I sipped my coffee, tilted my head. Didn't do much. Just put Henry back where he belongs. Karen scrambled out of the wreck, nearly tripping over the mangled fender. She stormed up to me, finger jabbing like a metronome gone haywire. "You booby-trapped it. I'll have you arrested. This is vandalism. No, attempted murder, asterisk." I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. "Attempted murder?" I echoed. "Karen, you're the one who drove onto my land and tried to kill a scarecrow." Her face turned a shade of red nature hadn't invented a name for. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I'll call the sheriff," she snapped. I nodded, calm as the sky. "Please do." And call him she did. Within the hour, Sheriff Tom's cruiser rolled up and parked beside the wrecked SUV. Karen's SUV sat crumpled in the field, steam still curling from its ruined hood, while she paced like a caged animal. Sheriff Tom stepped out of his cruiser, giving me a small nod before turning to Karen. The moment he was within earshot, she exploded into a tirade, arms flailing, voice climbing octaves, pointing at Henry like he'd personally insulted her ancestors. She painted me as some backwoods lunatic who had turned a harmless scarecrow into a death trap. Sheriff Tom listened, patient as ever, hands resting on his belt, nodding at all the right moments. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, he turned to me. "Mind if I take a look?" I waved a hand toward Henry. "Go ahead." Tom approached the scarecrow with the eye of a county fair judge. He tugged on the sleeves, knocked on the chest, crouched to inspect the base. After a long pause, he straightened up, turned to Karen and shrugged. "Looks like a well-built scarecrow to me," he said. "Sturdy, sure, but nothing illegal about that." Karen's mouth fell open. "Sturdy? It's a death trap." Sheriff Tom raised an eyebrow. "Karen, you drove onto his land without permission and hit an immovable object. That's not a crime on his part, that's just bad driving on yours." Karen let out a shriek that could have peeled paint. She spun toward me, eyes wild. "I'll sue. I'll sue you for everything you've got." I just smiled. "Best of luck with that." Sheriff Tom gave her a measured look before escorting her off the property. He casually reminded her that trespassing charges were still on the table and suggested she focus on getting her SUV towed. Karen didn't respond, just stomped to her ruined vehicle, yanked open the door and sat inside, glaring at me through the shattered windshield like she wanted to set me on fire with her eyes. By the time the tow truck hauled her wreck out of the field, half the town had shown up, pretending to be on errands just to watch. Old Man Jeff leaned against his truck, chewing a toothpick. Sally took pictures under the guise of documenting farm life for the fall newsletter. Even Sheriff Tom stuck around, sipping sweet tea like he was judging a pie contest. Karen kept her head down, but it was too late. Everyone saw. Everyone knew. And in a small town, knowing is half the punishment. The days that followed were quiet, but not the peaceful kind. The air felt charged like the stillness before a storm. Karen didn't drive by. She didn't make any more threats. She vanished into her oversized house, curtains drawn, shades pulled tight. But I felt it. This wasn't over. Still, I went about my business, fixed the fences, checked the cattle. Every now and then, I glanced toward the field and see Henry standing tall, steel bones hidden beneath flannel and straw, watching over everything like he always had. Except now he was more than just a scarecrow. He was a message. Karen might have thought this was about some old farm decoration. She might have believed she could throw her weight around like she did back in whatever HOA-infested suburb she crawled out of. But out here, respect isn't demanded. It's earned. And Karen? She was about to learn the hardest lesson yet. Because the scarecrow wasn't the only thing I'd been reinforcing. I'd been gathering something far more dangerous than steel. Proof. Karen came back swinging, just not in the way I expected. 2 mornings after the wreck, a crisp envelope showed up in my mailbox, sealed with the kind of dramatic wax stamp you'd expect from a law firm that overcharges for basic paperwork. Inside was a letter thick with legal threats, accusations of endangerment, emotional distress, and the promise of a lawsuit so massive it could bankrupt a man twice over. According to her, I had willfully weaponized a farm decoration with the intent to harm her and destroy her property. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, reading it over. By the 3rd paragraph I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was so perfectly Karen. The paper probably smelled like her perfume, and I wouldn't have been surprised if she'd insisted on gold-embossed letterhead. I folded it up, slid it back into the envelope, and set it beside the pile of unpaid feed store catalogs I hadn't bothered to throw out. Karen didn't have a case. She had desperation. She'd been humiliated in front of half the town, wrecked her precious SUV, and now she was scrambling to make it all my fault. But what Karen didn't know, what she hadn't even considered, was that I'd been ready for this since the moment I found Henry crumpled in the mud weeks ago. Later that day, Sheriff Tom showed up, not in uniform, just jeans and his old sheriff's ball cap, carrying a brown paper bag with 2 sandwiches from Sally's diner. He sat across from me on the porch and handed me one without a word. We ate in comfortable silence for a while before Tom finally broke it. "She's filing official charges," he said between bites. "Reckless endangerment, property damage. She even tried to throw in attempted vehicular manslaughter." I snorted. "Manslaughter? For a scarecrow?" Tom smirked. "Karen logic." He leaned back against the porch railing. "You got what I asked for?" I nodded and disappeared inside for a moment. When I came back, I handed him a small thumb drive. On it was everything, weeks' worth of footage I'd been quietly collecting. I hadn't just been fixing Henry. I'd been documenting everything. Trail cams, roof-mounted security angles, even a couple of old GoPros strapped in the trees after the second incident. Every time Karen had driven into that field to run over Henry, I had it, clear as day. Her smug grins. Her laughter. Even the note she'd pinned to Henry's broken frame. All of it captured in high definition. Tom turned the drive over in his hand. "You sure about this?" I looked out at the field, where Henry stood tall, his flannel sleeves catching the wind. "Yeah," I said. "It's time she learned you can't bulldoze your way through life out here." By the end of the week, the town was buzzing. Karen strutted into the diner like she owned it, waving legal papers around like a prize hen, bragging about her lawsuit and how she'd bury me in court until I begged her to sell the place for scraps. What she didn't know was that Sheriff Tom had already turned the footage over to the county prosecutor. And just like that, the tide turned. That Saturday, right in the middle of town, Karen got served. She was standing on the sidewalk outside the hardware store, shopping bag in hand, when the papers were handed to her. Trespassing. Property destruction. Harassment. Reckless endangerment. Turns out, repeatedly trespassing to destroy private property, on camera, isn't something the law smiles upon. Karen's face went ghost white. No tantrum. No screaming. Not even a weak excuse. Just stunned silence and a blank stare. By Sunday morning, she was the talk of every gas station, church potluck, and hair salon in the county. Some folks pitied her. Most didn't. Sheriff Tom made it clear, no special treatment, not even for some HOA queen from the suburbs. Her own HOA board ousted her as president within the week, citing embarrassment to the community. I heard there wasn't even much debate. Her insurance company followed suit. After reviewing the footage, they refused to cover the damage to her SUV. Too bad, they said. Self-inflicted and illegal. With court fees piling up and no backup plan, Karen was sinking faster than a duck in drought season. About 2 weeks later, just when I thought the dust had settled, I spotted her in the driveway, loading up a rental SUV. It was small, modest. A far cry from the chrome beast she used to charge into my field like a battering ram. No movers. No help. Just Karen, stuffing trash bags and plastic bins into the trunk with the same energy of someone fleeing a house fire. I didn't say a word. Just stood by the fence, arms crossed, watching. She slammed the trunk, wiped her face on the sleeve of her designer jacket, and drove off down the dirt road, kicking up dust behind her. A few neighbors stood on their porches watching too. No one waved. No one cheered. But you could feel it, that unspoken satisfaction settling over the land like morning dew. Karen was gone. And peace had returned to our little corner of the world. As for Henry, he stood exactly where he always had, straw hat tilted just so, arms outstretched like he was welcoming the breeze. Only now he wore a shiny little sheriff's badge on his chest. A gift from Tom at the next town gathering. Not official, of course. But it made folks smile every time they passed the field. That evening, the sunset spilled across the sky in shades of orange and rose. I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the cattle graze, listening to the wind rustling through the corn. The whole farm exhaled like it had been holding its breath right along with me. Karen had come in like a storm, fast, loud, and full of fury. But like most storms out here, she passed. I raised my cup toward Henry. "Good work, old friend," I murmured. He didn't answer, of course. Just stood there, flannel shirt rippling in the wind, steel bones wrapped in straw. Not just a scarecrow anymore. A symbol. A reminder that sometimes the quiet and the steady ones? They're the ones who win in the end. You just have to stand your ground. The end.